Dear brothers and sisters,
Amen.
I'm so happy to be here with you today. That's such a blessing for me. And I have to repeat what Sina said. I have never had such a wonderful worship in my life. Never. I enjoyed it so much. And when we were singing this one song, when praises go up,
Yes.
glory comes down.
Yes.
I had a picture in my mind of the Lord sitting there on his throne, and then he came down and danced with us, and that touched my heart so much. So thank you so much. It's such a blessing to be here with you today. And I would like to speak today about hearing and following God's voice. And for this, I would like to read with you John 10, verse 27. John 10, 27. And here Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." How many of you have any experience with sheep? Oh, Anne does. That's great. Anyone else? Okay. Good, because I myself don't have any. But I read a bit about sheep, and I found out that they are quite interesting animals. And in the Bible, Jesus very often uses this parable of the shepherd and the sheep, right? To illustrate the relationship between himself and us. And this is because at the time when Jesus lived, a lot of people owned sheep, and they could understand how the shepherd cares for the sheep and how sheep react to the shepherd. Well, nowadays I think that most of us don't understand this, because we have, except Anne and Sina, no experience with sheep. And in John 10, verse 5, Jesus says, "But they do not follow a stranger, but flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." And you know, some time ago I watched a video of 3 young people who did an experiment. They wanted to test if this is true. If the sheep really only hear the voice of their shepherd and respond to him, or if they also follow strangers' voices. And so they went to a shepherd and let him teach them the calling, how he calls the sheep. And then they went to the pasture where the sheep were grazing, and they started calling the sheep. One by one they tried, but there was no reaction from the sheep. They just ignored this. And then the shepherd came, and he started calling them. I'm not going to demonstrate this, I hope that's okay for you. And then you could see in that video that they suddenly raised their heads, they started bleating, and they ran to the shepherd. And in an instant they were all gathered around him. So that was the proof that sheep indeed only hear the voice of the shepherd, but not strangers' voices. What about us? Which voice do we hear? do we hear God's voice, or do we hear the voice of the world around us? Do we know God's voice? The sheep, they only know the voice of their shepherd because they spend a lot of time with him. They are together all day. On the very first day, when a shepherd takes over a flock of sheep, they don't know his voice yet. It's a stranger's voice, but day by day, the more time they spend with him, his voice becomes familiar to them, and they get used to his calling. And with the time, a very close relationship between the shepherd and the sheep develops. And it is the same with us. What we spend most time in our daily time with, that's the voice that we hear most clearly. So what are the things you spend the most time of the day with? Everyone can just think for themselves, of course. I don't want you to report, but do you spend time with God every day? God speaks to us constantly in many different ways, but we often miss his speaking because we are too busy or too distracted by other things, like our jobs, which is of course okay, jobs, family, hobbies, television, and whatever else we do. But to hear God's voice, we have to spend time with him in the silence without being distracted, right? God speaks to us through his word. When we read in the Bible and when we meditate on his word, he's revealing himself to us. We gain more knowledge of who he is, and we get to know him better and better. It's like recognizing the voice of your wife, your husband, your children or friends when they call you. They don't need to introduce themselves, right? You immediately recognize who is on the phone. But why? Because you have spent a lot of time with them and you immediately recognize the voice. If a stranger would call you, you would not know whose voice it is. And I know my sheep, Jesus says. A shepherd knows every single sheep in his flock, no matter how big the flock is. And it is the same with Jesus. He knows every one of us. We are also a kind of flock of believers, a big flock getting even bigger. But he knows every single one of us, and he approaches us, each of us individually. He doesn't treat all of us in the same way because he knows that we are unique.